Hello, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for tuning in. My name is Jennifer Anderson, and we have a special guest with us tonight listening in. This evening, you will have the pleasure of listening to the Creative Nonfiction Workshop share some of the excellent work they produced this semester. This class, comprised of beginning, intermediate, and advanced students of creative nonfiction, has worked so hard reading, critiquing, and writing a variety of long and short essays. I am inspired by their words and insights and hope you will be too. Now, I will turn it over to the class.
Our first reading for the evening will be Sam Armstrong.
Hello, I will be reading a piece called The Swimming Hole. It was a little under a mile walk from our house to the swimming hole. There was a little park speckled with trees and tables where families would picnic or grandparents would sit with the obese cousins and aunts and uncles while the rest of the family would run down across the sand that burnt their feet and jump into the murky water. A floating dock framed the area, giving ample places to jump into the water from, while also keeping the swimmers contained so that the infamous currents of the Snake River didn't drag away the children. On either side, the banks of the river quickly rose onto rocky cliffs that hemmed the little swimming hole. We went as a family a few times. My brothers loved swimming, and you didn't have to pay here, like the swimming pool in town. Once or twice, we packed lunch and ate amongst the other picnickers. Most of the time, though, it was just a handful of us. The younger boys would want to swim, and myself and or my older sister would come along as the older sibling to keep an eye on everyone. I wouldn't swim very often. I've never been much of a swimmer, and the water was freezing. But I'd dip my feet in a bit and wade in the shallows and along the water line where the sand was wet so it didn't burn my feet, and it would crunch and squish under every step. My brothers would splash around for an hour or so while I wandered back and forth. Then we'd go home again, just a short walk across a rocky field and past a bunch of construction businesses and a sewage plant. I never cared to be there with my family, but I'd occasionally go alone. I'd walk on cloudy days or in the evening when it was too cold to be in the water anyway. Sometimes there'd still be some stragglers in the park, families packing up their activities, or couples making out on their towels spread across the sand. I would sit wordlessly on the lava rocks that lined the cliffs and watch the osprey that ruled this stretch of river as it dove and dragged fish from the river. I'd stand shivering in the cool wind, watching the oranges and pinks of sunset dance across the water. I'd walk home just before the last light, turning away from the river so I'd be home just as the world is only visible in shadows and shades of gray. Thank you. Our next reader, all right, my apologies. Our next reader is Blaze Duggar.
Right. I'm going to be reading a piece called Chasing Catfish. There's a place, a corner of this world I feel to be my own. I know this to be false. It has traveled often and often bears the signs of others' past presence, but it still feels as though it was made for me. I feel afraid whenever I draw closer to it, that I will find somebody there sitting in my spot, drinking or fishing and soiling it, but is always free of occupation when I need it. It is a bank of earth upon a lake which was placed by man and left to settle. The grassy slope is difficult to place a chair on without fear of tipping, and in late May the muck and algae spawn swarms of mosquitoes. Two large rock outcrops frame the shore and create a fortified boundary from perpendicular invaders. They make this place feel safe, despite the fact that it is just off the beaten path. In June, the water is high, and about 30 feet out there peaks a circle of 3 or 4 boulders where the catfish gather to wallow and suck. The lake proper ends in this corner and turns to naught but reeds and lily grass well around the bend of the shoreline, tucking away from sight. They stretch along the bank, making reeling in a hooked fish a pain when it happens. Most days there aren't enough bites for this to matter, but there are days it plays the villain. To some, it is a musky and uncomfortable place where they arrive unscorched and clean, but leave red and covered with the bites of pests. To me, well, mosquitoes never bite me. When the sun falls beneath the trees and they are free from the tyranny of the heron who resides nearby, the fish begin to jump and splash, preying on the bugs which inhabit the surface. The air becomes cool and the breeze makes thin and even ripples across the lake, like a glass of water resting on the hood of a car. The loop plays in my head. I reel in and recast, landing right in the middle of the circle of rocks. My bobber floats there, a foam ball comprised of pure tension as the anticipation rises within, and slowly dissipates as it moves only with the rippling of the water. I play and jig it back and forth, knowing this will help nothing. I must be patient. This is supposed to be meditative, but I am here focusing on the prize. I breathe, reel in, and recast. I may catch nothing, but I am here in my place. This is where I learned to fish. I was 2 years old. We were still using our old silver panel van to camp. My dad had bought me a G.I. Joe pole from Sherman's, one of those ones where you just press the button and release it to catch. I remember catching the most fish of anyone that day, learning which were of value and which weren't. The rainbow trout were my dad's favorite because he could clean and cook them tonight. The small and largemouth bass were nice to catch, but he thought them a pain to clean, so he had us throw them back. The perch, sunfish, and the bluegill, all of these were nothing notable to him as they were so small, and they were violent and painful to me due to their spines. One particularly large one I pulled in cut my finger enough to draw blood, but it wasn't enough to stop me. Finally, there were the big fish. Someone else with us, a boyfriend of my mom's friend, came here to finally catch one of the tiger muskie, which allegedly inhabited the muddier corners of the lake. My dad and I still never seen one. We'd seen friends of ours catching channel and bullhead catfish down the shore from us, but we never got one to bite. I asked Dad where they were, and he surmised they were probably somewhere on the backside of the lake. I pleaded to go searching, but it was getting dark. It was time to head back to camp. Many years later, I got to explore the backside while walking. I stumbled upon my place. I knew in an instant that they were here. They had to be, but by this time I only found time to fish once or twice a year, as the looming threat of high school on the horizon and a mean case of teenage angst had rearranged my priorities. It wasn't until 17 years after that original exchange with my father that I actually found myself on that bank, tucked away from the rest of the park. We came armed to find the mudsuckers. We were using raw chicken soaked in garlic and jello affixed to large hooks as bait. I had doubts on what we would get. For all I knew, we would get no bites. I worried that I had dragged my two friends here for nothing. Luckily for me, as my spot as uncomfortable as they found it was generous to us. The first hit on my line felt prophetic. I had recast once or twice, trying to really zero in my aim on the rock circle. The first cast to land right in the middle made me freeze. I wasn't moving until I saw the bobber submerge. Time slowed and I felt like I had fixed my eyes to it for days when it finally sank. I yanked high above my head to set the hook and began to reel. I knew by the weight that this wasn't a perch or a bluegill. It wasn't one of the baby bass I had been getting off of worms for the last few years. This was something large. When it got to the reeds, I saw not iridescent scales of green or silver, but thick rubbery skin of black and long whiskers hanging down. The rumors were true. I felt as though I had fulfilled a lifelong arc. We threw in our makeshift live well in the water and proceeded to catch many more catfish throughout the day. We ate very well that night, a victory feast of fried fish and potatoes. I make sure to go out to the point whenever I am near. The satisfaction and peace it gave me will never be repaid or matched, but I can try. For someday I fear I won't be able to make the short trek out to it, and it may forget me. Our next reader is Clayton Gish.
Hello, this is called View of the Valley. It was a wonderful late June day in 2019, and I had moved to Lewiston, Idaho less than a week prior. The sun was shining brightly through my dusty windshield. I had the windows down instead of using the air conditioning. No clouds in the sky, and the wind, which I had yet to experience, was relatively calm. Zoe, my black and silver standard poodle, sitting vigil, eyes closed, nose to the wind with an air of judgment against the folks not in her car ride, and nearly invisible against gray-black interior of my Jeep Patriot. As I head north on Main, I pass through the heart of the state's one-time capital. This is 5th through 9th Streets. The oldest section of Commerce is comprised of a mixture between Victorian brick era buildings and stick-built business fronts that replaced the once grand architecture that stood before. The Avista Utilities building smacks of classic mid-century, using wood and rock elements, a telltale sign of the evolution of architectural design. As I continue to drive, 11th through 18th Streets give way to more modern convenience. The sandstone beauty that is Lewiston Courthouse, oddly juxtaposed next to a Dairy Queen, and directly across the Craftsman-style train station that now houses a lawyer's office and tattoo parlor, but the facade is restored to original. Some of the old buildings still exist here, even though they are in disrepair or only partially filled. An old 4-story grain building is now an antique store. The eye is also drawn to a few stucco or cement low-profile buildings that house bars, gas stations, and coffee shops. A motorcycle dealership, also peddling side-by-side, sneaks up on the left, and across the street from there are the typical new and used car dealerships indicative of any town of 30,000. I pass by all of this as the hills across the Clearwater River catch my eye, and I am curious to see the view of the valley from up above. I seek out I-95 North at the end of Main. If you want to head to Moscow, Coeur d'Alene, or Pullman, this is the route you take. Immediately, the highway begins to incline, a 2-lane highway bisecting the hillside in a gradual switchback. It's difficult not to gape in awe of the construction marvel of DOT. As I crest the hill, pushing my little Jeep to the brink to maintain the speed of 55, I see a historic site sign guiding me to the left in 1 mile. We turn left and cross the 2 lanes of hectic traffic of I-95 South in a hurry and lumbering down into the depths of Lewiston's industrial area. I see the valley yawn open, gaping mouth, exposing the forked tongue that is the Snake and Clearwater rivers, replete with jack-o'-lantern teeth represented by strategically placed bridges to traverse between Lewiston, Idaho, and Clarkston, Washington. To the left of this awe-inspiring view, I see Clearwater Paper Mill belching out its off gases. To the right of the mill, a small conglomeration of businesses, the likes of mini home sales lot, convenience store, gas station, farm store of some sort. I only recognize these by the odd shapes of the buildings and bright colors of implements to be peddled. The river controls the landscape at this juncture, the winds and turns admitting only what it wants to have along its shores. Jagged hills encompass the Lewis-Clark Valley, drab brown, peaks dusted with powdered sugar snow, only to be broken by the smattering of groves, farms, and parks. Additionally, main arterial streets are lined with beautiful, mature, deciduous trees, looking the size of Lego toys. Dissect the deceivingly steep hills I am now looking down upon. I feel as a god on Olympus, never before laying eyes on such unique grandeur. I have fallen in love. Thank you. And now I'd like to introduce our next reader, Eric Kelly.
It's kind of a funny story. I don't know when I finally fell asleep, but it was sometime after the 3rd showing of the same SportsCenter episode. I've never had any sort of circadian rhythm, causing my sleep patterns to be erratic, so this was common. In this instance, I'd fallen asleep in front of the 40-inch television on the living room floor of the 2-bedroom apartment that I shared with my mother, who was on a trip at the time. At some god-awful early hour, light barely showing outside my one slightly uncovered window, I was suddenly jolted awake by a violent knocking on my door. "Police!" a muffled voice called out. I opened the door to find 2 officers, one much taller than the other, in full black tactical patrol uniforms with dark sunglasses covering their eyes, obscuring the colors. The straightness of their lips and lack of facial movement suggested to me that this visit was likely to take a somber turn. If these long-faced and humorless officers had ever been cast for a buddy comedy, it would have been canceled during production. I had never been graced with the presence of law enforcement at such an hour, or any hour for that matter. I was at least curious enough to hear about what tragedy had occurred somewhere in the vicinity of my residence. "We got a call about a dead body on the floor of this residence," the taller officer sternly said to me. Being a straight A student at Boise State University in English Studies and an absolute stud at public speaking during communications courses, I know exactly how to articulate the perfect response to such a situation. What? Without any change in expression, the officer responded. Someone reported seeing a dead body through the window of this residence. We're going to need to come in. I proceeded to explain that I was the only one in the apartment as my mother had gone up to Lewiston to visit her family. And since I was clearly alive and had merely fallen asleep while lying on the floor, there was no reason for them to be here. Unfortunately, my proof of life not only failed to quell their suspicions that something sinister had occurred, but placed their sights on me as the potential perpetrator of a murder. Of course, I had no idea what the officers were talking about, as I was certain I hadn't so much as said a mean word to another person in quite some time. In fact, the only things I killed in recent memory were a bag of nacho cheese Doritos and a 2-liter bottle of Pepsi, both of which were lying in plain sight, so very recent memory. We're going to need you to remain over there for a while, the tall officer commanded while pointing to an open area near the furniture in the living room. It was clearly in my best interest to comply, so I stood with my back to the window that someone had apparently looked into and started this whole fiasco. The shorter of the two officers proceeded to search my room and bathroom extensively for a body that I knew didn't exist. I waited for him to find nothing while the tall officer carefully watched me as if I was a fictional super spy who would suddenly bust out some crazy martial arts to subdue them and make my escape. The guy literally did not take his eyes off me or move a muscle. Even through his pitch black sunglasses, it was clear that I was the focus of his sentinel-like gaze. Next, the shorter officer moved on to the kitchen. He checked the cabinets. I barely had enough room for the boxes of cereal and bag of chips that furnished them. Clearly, these guys thought highly of my alleged ability to Houdini an entire human being if they thought I could Tetris one into a pantry cabinet that a 5-year-old wouldn't be able to smash into. Lastly, my mother's bedroom was thoroughly scanned because whatever they were looking for just had to be in there, or else they'd have to come around to the possibility that maybe I really was just too lazy to take myself into my bedroom to sleep. He struck out as expected and came back to his partner. All clear, he said with the enthusiasm of an Imperial stormtrooper. As much as I wanted to voice a witty remark that would condescendingly tell them how effective they were at wasting everyone's time, I held it back. Some of the Boise Police Department had a reputation for arresting people for verbal remarks, and the last thing I needed was to give them a reason to not walk away empty-handed. We appreciate your cooperation, the tall officer coldly said to me. No problem. Have a nice day, I responded, not wanting to open any other avenues of communication. The officers left without saying anything else, and as suddenly as it had begun, the strange ordeal was over. It had gotten to be just past 6 o'clock, but was only as light outside as it had been at 5:30. I hadn't thought to inquire about details of the call that brought them to my apartment or what was said to make them jump to the assumption that I had killed someone when they found no one dead on my living room floor. Truthfully, I just wanted them gone because I knew nothing had transpired and the situation was so bizarre that I just wanted it to end. After I had a little time to think about it, I realized that my privacy had been infringed upon. For the police to have been summoned to my apartment at all, someone had to have looked through my window. Sure, I had left one uncovered by the curtain enough for a passerby to see inside, but who peruses someone else's window at 5:30 in the morning? Do I walk around at the first sign of morning light, looking at other people's apartments, and call the police if I see anything suspicious? No. What kind of world do we live in where a sober human being can't pass out on his own floor in front of his television without someone declaring him possibly murdered and getting the authorities involved? For a few days following the unwanted wellness check, I would look at that window when it's too dark to see what's on the other side, and I would wave. Because there's no way someone could be there again. Definitely, probably, maybe. You know what? I'm just gonna go close the damn window. Thank you. Next, I'd like to introduce Austin Landcam.
Hello. This story is called Near Sam Glen. When I arrived at LCSC during my 3rd year of college, I was given an assignment on nature by my documentary professor. On campus, he wanted us to find a spot where we could envelop ourselves in nature. So instead of running around trying to find a spot that I could write about, I walked to a nearby tree just outside the building. Nothing about the tree itself stood out. It wasn't all that tall. It was around 10 feet by my estimations, yet its branches and leaves were rather wide enough to stretch across the sidewalk going towards the building. The leaves themselves were dark green with pine needles peeking out from the tree. Every once in a while, I could hear a squirrel or two running across the branches, yet no birds or their calls were heard. However, I wasn't there for the squirrels or the birds, so I went to take photos with my phone and write what I saw. Every time I breathed, the smell of pine needles invaded my nostrils, something that made me gag a little. Eventually, I had found everything I wanted and left to go back inside to finish class. Next year went by with me not thinking too much about the tree. One brisk morning changed that. As I was walking to one of my classes, I saw a squirrel run up a tree with something in its hands. I had some extra time, so I took a quick detour to see what the animal had. It had reached the top of the tree where I heard the rustling of a bag. As I was at the right angle, I saw that it had a bag of fast food with it, with a bright red Wendy's logo on it. I couldn't tell if it still had food in the bag, but I didn't smell anything, so I assumed that there was nothing in the bag. The sight of the squirrel with his loot was enough to make me laugh, as the bag looked like it would fall down at any moment. Still, I was beginning to run out of time, so I left a victorious squirrel behind to go by my next class. I didn't see the squirrel or its bag when I went back later that day. During springtime, I would feel a lot sleepier than normal. I would never actually fall asleep, but I would nod off if I was sitting down. I had that feeling one afternoon, so I sat on a nearby wooden bench to try and gather my thoughts. I realized that I sat down near the tree I had worked with before, except there was a pile of pine cones sitting at the base of the tree. Even though the bench was somewhat uncomfortable on my backside, I was so tired that I must have drifted off, as I nearly fell off the bench and onto some pine cones. I still managed to crunch one with one of my feet, however, and bits of it flew off into different directions. An odd feeling struck me, as I felt a sudden urge to pick up the pieces and throw them away into the garbage. Although I did throw away the pieces, I also thought I was getting way too tired just because I wanted to pick up pine cones and throw them in the trash. So I decided to go home and forget about the pine cones and hopefully get some rest. Outside of these incidents, I decided to not go back to that tree. Something about that tree is still with me, even when I don't notice it's even there. Our next reader is Jacob Gongager.
Hello, going to be reading Under the Bridge. One night's journey on foot into the solitude of night led me down the road, across the bridge, and under it. Underneath the river crossing, I stepped onto the path that was my destination for the evening. The asphalt path, usually meant for joggers and happy dogs on walks, was completely left to me, I thought. As I passed under the gray concrete in front of me, I heard a sound. Meow. I immediately called back with my best cat impression that served me so well in the past with roommates' cats. Meow. The small white smudge appeared out of the bushes by the water. It walked towards me with the attitude a cat has when walking towards its owner offering food. The cat quickly stepped across the path and right to me. In the past, when I had met stray cats, they are often cautious and would rarely let a stranger pick them up. This cat was different. It walked right to my feet and stood up on its hind legs, leaning on me. Its tiny white head was swallowed by my hand and pets. As it moved closer, I could see the young kitty was white with subtle gray markings down its back. It let me pick it up, the ultimate sign of trust a stray animal can give a stranger. I stood under the bridge, petting the cat and giving it all the love it was obviously missing. I tried to walk a few steps with it in my arms, but it was too much uncertainty for a new friend. The cat squirmed and I set it down. I walked a few paces, thinking our encounter was over. The cat called out for me, wondering where I was going. I called back and told it to come along. A short distance down the path, I had coaxed the cat to a bench. We sat on the bench and I wondered where the cat came from. It was in too good of shape to be homeless. But why was it down here under the bridge? Why was I here? In the moment, it felt like we were meant to find each other there. We were two lone wanderers who happened to chance each other's compassion in the dead of night. It was different than just a sighting of a stray. I felt an instant connection with this cat. I had to make sure it was taken care of. I decided that it was probably somebody's cat that had escaped for the evening, so taking it with me was not something I wanted to do. It would get home at some point if that were true. I decided the best thing I could do is to leave it some food and see if it stuck around. The cat was sitting on my lap getting attention every cat deserves, but the store would be closing soon. I set the cat on the bench next to me, started up the path towards the store for a can of tuna. The cat followed. Meow, meow, meow. The kid called for me like I was its mother, so I called back and continued to see how long it would follow me. I led it all the way to the major intersection I needed to cross to get to the store. It was naturally afraid of the road and wouldn't cross with me. I led it around a building and down the street from the intersection. I thought it would cross where there wasn't so much light. The next crossing attempt, it stopped following me. I called out to it and tried to coax the cat closer to the store. It refused to cross the road, so I decided that I just had to go quickly and hopefully it would stay where it was or go back under the bridge. Almost the whole way to the store, I could hear the cat crying out repeatedly, meow, meow, meow. I returned to the spot where I crossed the road shortly after and there was no cat. I went back under the bridge and again, there was no cat. My stomach felt hollow and empty. I had no clue where the innocent little kid had gone. I looked at the cans of tuna and realized I had no can opener. I never saw my cat again. Now I would like to introduce our next speaker, Kate Laws.
I will be reading two short pieces. The first one is called Fight Like a Girl. I entered the search terms women plus wrestling into Google and took excerpts from news articles that were found from between April 2020 and February 2021. A seventh grader has done something few women ever do, and that's wrestle competitively. A former female student at Union City Middle School is now returning as the head wrestling coach. Mostly dominated by men in the past, women's wrestling has been on the rise in East Tennessee. Women's wrestling is an emerging sport and is just one step away from becoming fully sanctioned by the NCAA. WWE's women wrestlers aren't afraid to get hardcore in the ring. On the final day of the National Women's Wrestling Championships in Agra, India, a local sports enthusiast expressed his desire to give a buffalo worth 150,000 rupees to the best athlete of the event. In a milestone moment, the Gothic Knights women's wrestling program was featured on the 5 o'clock evening news last night. Male wrestler Kenny Omega said that he hopes more women get the chance to invade all elite wrestling and show how talented and hungry they are. Girls wrestling has seen a growth of 27.5% in this past year alone, and the numbers could be even higher as 8 states do not report their participation in the sport. Former wrestler and creator of Shimmer Wrestling, Allison Danger, says female wrestlers now are breaking through perceptions and stereotypes, showing they are not only athletes, but headliners. Currently, the NCAA does not recognize women's wrestling as an official sport, despite the fact it happens to be one of the fastest growing sports in middle and high school. No wrestling due to COVID-19 restrictions obviously hurts thousands of athletes across the state, but it also halts the momentum girls wrestling had going. Former women's WWE champion Gail Kim believes that Vince McMahon was the one suppressing the women in his company. Unable to pick who the best female wrestler was, the Wrestling Federation of India, made up of 2 men, decided to accept the gift of a buffalo themselves on behalf of the wrestler. Promoter Dave Finlay was told by WWE that they wanted catfights and wardrobe malfunctions instead of proper wrestling matches between women. Janine Miosef, known as Mad Maxine in the 80s, claims that young female wrestling proteges were prostituted to make extra money for their mentors. A University of Iowa freshman found the lack of support for women's wrestling unusual and disappointing, as she knows of growing strong support for female wrestling in high schools across the state. Despite their major draw with fans, some female wrestlers believe their pay still doesn't measure up to the men. It's 2021, and we shouldn't constantly have to talk about how awful the divisions are in major wrestling companies. "You fight like a girl" is muttered derisively by someone meaning to insult, to imply weakness or softness. But stand tall. Sally Ride, Amelia Earhart, Bianca Belair, Kamala Harris, Condoleezza Rice, Alexa Bliss, Sasha Banks, and many others have your back. "You fight like a girl"? The appropriate response to this sentiment will always be, "I hope so." My second piece is called "The Unattractiveness of Living." Look at my scars. They'll tell you some stories. Like this one on my chin. I got it in 3rd grade in the middle of winter when I was playing tag, hands in my pockets because I'd forgotten my gloves at home. I remember the pulling pressure and the scraping sound inside my head as the emergency room doctor dug the gravel out of the wound before stitching me up. It didn't heal great. It's a little jagged, and I can still feel the slight ridge of it if I rub my thumb over the flesh. Sometimes hair grows in it and I have to pluck it out, standing over my magnifying mirror as I laugh and whisper to myself, "Not by the hair of my chinny chin chin." Then there's the one on my belly button where I got my navel pierced in my early 20s. I should have known it was a bad idea when I went in to have it done. I hadn't worn earrings since I was 17 because after a couple hours they would get red and itchy. But it was the 90s and I wanted to be cool, so I made a very expensive mistake. Within a few days, it was an angry, weeping sore, and I had to remove the little aquamarine loop with a granite ball. Sometimes I see it in my jewelry box, a reminder of a time when I could afford to make expensive mistakes. Last, you should look at my left leg. Look at the curved line from my ankle bone to just below mid-calf. This one I received when I was 16 and hit a patch of black ice. My parents' Bronco rolled 3 times before landing sideways in a ditch. I cut my leg when I climbed out the driver's side window so I could walk to the closest house and call for help. Later, the sheriff told my dad he was surprised I'd survived. Thank you. And it's my pleasure to introduce our next reader, Rosellen Linder. Hello. This piece is called "The Baby Bust," and it was compiled and arranged information from the search terms "woman giving birth" in international news outlets over the course of the COVID-19 pandemic. A woman gave birth on a plane flying into Anchorage and named her baby Sky. A Texas woman gave birth to quadruplets after undergoing brain surgery. A video doorbell captured a mother giving birth standing in the parking lot outside her birthing center. Police rushed to the scene but were unneeded. A 51-year-old woman gave birth to her own granddaughter after serving as gestational carrier for her daughter and son-in-law. A 57-year-old woman gave birth to a healthy son, breaking the New Hampshire state record for oldest mother via IVF. A woman passed her bar exam after going into labor during the first half. She completed the second day of testing while anemic from blood loss and on only 1.5 hours of sleep. A laboring Orlando woman refused to go to the hospital to deliver her baby on election day until after her ballot was cast. An Indian woman traveling on foot with her husband and 4 children stopped to give birth before completing her 100-mile walk with the new baby. A Honduran woman gave birth on the Mexican side of the Ignacio Zaragoza Bridge, trying to cross into the United States. Her baby will be granted Mexican citizenship, and she was taken to a Matamoros hospital where she received free health care. The Seoul government gave expectant mothers advice of preparing frozen meals before giving birth, since their husbands will not be sufficient cooks. A Kenyan study found doctors prefer blind obedience in obstetric patients over educated compliance with guidelines. 1/3 of these doctors believed it necessary to place mother in restraints while giving birth in case of disobedience. Hong Kong police officers were criticized after the mistreatment of a pregnant woman during her arrest, after which she went into preterm labor. A popular Nigerian journalist died 2 days after giving birth to twins. The cause of death was not disclosed to the public. A South Florida woman gave birth alone in her jail cell after being refused medical attention when she told authorities she was experiencing contractions. They offered her a prenatal vitamin and required her to clean her own vomit while laboring. Zimbabwean women have been forced to pay bribes for beds in birthing clinics, forcing some to resort to risky home deliveries. An Indian mother of 2 daughters was tortured to death by her in-laws after not giving birth to a son. After witnessing the birth of his twins, a UK man went to visit the home of another woman where he raped her in her sleep. I'm glad he won't ever see his children again. A Kentucky woman could not find any unlocked doors at her local hospital due to the pandemic. She gave birth on the sidewalk, and her husband tied the cord with a face mask. A Texas woman gave birth to a healthy baby girl 2 months after surviving COVID-19. A woman hospitalized for COVID-19 gave birth at 26 weeks while intubated and named her primary nurse as the godmother. A laboring woman was diagnosed with asymptomatic COVID-19 and gave birth to a healthy baby girl. Shortly afterward, the woman's mother was hospitalized and placed on life support due to the virus. COVID-19 caused multiple blood clots in both lungs of a Virginia woman during her emergency C-section. A Missouri woman diagnosed with COVID-19 gave birth 3 months premature and died days after. A woman was intubated for COVID-19 symptoms minutes after giving birth and died with her family around her. A California woman died from COVID-19 2 weeks after giving birth to a healthy baby girl. A mother of 5 gave birth to her 6th child while diagnosed with COVID-19 and died 3 days later without the chance to hold her new baby. A woman was diagnosed with COVID-19 9 months into her 4th pregnancy. She gave birth in a medically induced coma and spent 3 months in critical condition before being sent home to see her family and begin the journey of recovery. Her doctors commented that they don't understand why some people recover and some don't. Birth rates have been falling in 2021 in what they're calling the baby bust. I'm among those with an empty womb. I've always seen it as too much of a risk to my plans, to my body. But now so many more are asking what the point is in laying down on white beds and ripping ourselves open again. What is the point in making something so vulnerable when the whole world is already prostrate, already screaming? But in March, the first baby was born having inherited COVID-19 immunity from its vaccinated mother. Mothers have always brought their children into a cruel and dying world. Birth has never been anything less than the assurance of death, but it is still a miracle. The first among many and many more miracles humanity is learning to perfect. Thank you. And now I would like to introduce our next reader, my good friend, Cedar Miller. Hello. This is titled One Moment in Two Parts. Part 1, The Fire. She has always had perfect hair in a not so tight ponytail, but tight enough to show that she meant business. And it worked. It made people listen to her. She was the prime example of a put together life, and that's what she wanted everyone to think. She screamed constantly. I'm not sure why anymore. Maybe I didn't have my chores done, or maybe I was just starting them as she arrived home, or maybe the trash needed taking out and I was making dinner. Maybe it was something else entirely. She screamed, and it was as if her hair screamed too. It stood up like it was being electrocuted, each word sending another jolt of electricity through her and to the ends of her hair. I don't ask that much of you. She only came home to get something.
She was fuming. Steam rolled off her body and it enveloped me, and I forgot how to breathe. You never think about anyone else. My ribs trapped the air in my lungs. I tried to respond. I couldn't. The words, there were none. I couldn't think. I couldn't move. Tears streamed down. No stopping them. There was no breath. I remember standing, unable to move, unable to speak. She continued gathering up her notebooks and pens, the electricity increasing with each movement, sparks igniting and diminishing faster until the steam became smoke, forcing me to breathe in each word until all her words became part of me. No one is ever going to love you. The match struck. I caught fire, frozen in place, suffocating by smoke. The electricity, the steam, the sparks all vanished from her as fast as they'd ignited. She became the perfect mom again. She smoothed her hair with one hand, and it was just as perfect as it was before. And then she walked out the door. Part 2, the ashes. Feet glued to the fake hard floor. Tear after tear escape my eyes as she stands there, yelling. My body shakes from trying to contain the pain that's escaping me. Look at me. I do. Through the tears I see her, blurry, angry, yelling. Nobody will ever love you for what you love. Black, everything. I must have closed my eyes, but I can see her leaving. The floor and the door go black and disappear into nothing. The door slams shut. I'm standing in blackness, but I feel like I'm falling. I am falling. My knees hit the fake hardwood that's turned black. It shouldn't have hurt. It should have hurt. It didn't. I scream. The ringing in my ears increases until I hear nothing. I can't hear anything. Not even the echo returns and the emptiness stretches further. I cry and no one hears me. I'm alone, lost, empty. I try to move away from the black emptiness. It follows me down the fake hardwood stairs. My eyes are open. My hand is in front of me, fuzzy, disappearing. Disappearing, I'm disappearing. My room is at the bottom of the stairs, the fake room, her house. It's not mine, but I know where everything is, where it's supposed to be. It is there, the blanket, the bear. The empty has reached them too. They are nothing. I grab them anyway. I scream, I cry, I am nothing, empty, non-existent, dark, nothing. So much of nothing that I try to convince myself it was an act, a game, a test, a lie. That's it. That's it. She's lying. She's lying. She's lying. But why would she say that? Why would she say, why would she, why would, why? She doesn't love me. I am nothing. I am no one. I know no one. Empty, nothing, shell. I am a shell. The shape of me is still the same. It's what she and they will always see. The shell. The soul of me that has shattered, blasted far away, small shards. No way to glue them back together. Lost to the empty, to the blackness. Shards of what used to be my soul expelled to nothing. Through the tears, screams, scratches, pulled hair, heaving air from my lungs. It's all gone. I feel nothing. I'm only a shell. Thank you. And now I'd like to introduce Danny Mills.
The piece I'm going to be reading is Attack of the Flower Girl. I kicked the church pew in front of everyone. I was mad, and damn it, I was going to let everyone at my uncle's wedding know that they had earned the wrath of a 3-year-old. I'm sure both of my parents were mortified as I desecrated the wedding venue with the sole of my tiny white shoe. This wasn't the first time I had lashed out in front of strangers. I was never known to be a happy child. I was known to growl and bare my teeth when a sweet lady would compliment my outfit or hair. The first words I ever said to my sister-in-law were, "Get out of my room." Despite these instances, I delivered my crowning display of righteous fury at that wedding. I had been kept up all day as there was a lot to do before the ceremony began. I was required to be in pictures because I was gifted with the job of flower girl. My uniform was a white dress that reached my shins, that twirled when I would spin really fast in tornado-like fashion. I had a burgundy ribbon tied around my waist that matched the ribbons on my little basket full of rose petals. As the picture process wore on, naturally a 3-year-old gets tired, especially when they are used to taking naps. However, there was no time for naps that day, and I was getting ticked because no one would let me fall asleep. The ceremony began, and it was my turn to walk down the aisle, tossing rose petals like a pro as I passed people staring at me from the pews. About halfway to my destination at the front of the church, when I knew everyone had eyes on me before my new aunt stepped out in her white gown, I stopped. I turned to the right, I reared my right foot back, and then I let that wooden pew have it. After I released my frustration, I returned to doing my job. I finished walking down the aisle, tossing the rose petals. I wish I could remember what it felt like to kick that pew. Maybe if I remembered feeling a cathartic release, I would kick things still. Now, as I look at a patient checking in to see the chiropractor I work for, I seethe and let my anger stew. I tug my blouse and wipe the sweat off my forehead from being stuck in a hot and dark room, developing x-rays. After the patient accuses me of having a coffee break in the back and not doing my job, I play the role of a good employee and I smile instead of kicking the wood desk I stand behind. Thank you. And last but certainly not least is Jade Mosman.
My piece is called Subliminal. Your odyssey begins in the chilly morning, just as the sun peeks over the horizon. Your shoulders support a lightweight backpack with nothing but the necessities: 2 water bottles, sunscreen, a couple granola bars, and a peanut butter and jelly sandwich that will surely be slightly squished by the end of your journey. Pebbles grind under your sturdy shoes as you ascend the trail imprinted into the earth by millions of footsteps. The scent of pine and earth wafts through the air as you trek up the mountainside through a forest of aspens and conifers. Rays of sunshine through the dark trunks come down in a canopy of branches, needles, and pine cones, which are occasionally disturbed by the skittering and leaping of squirrels or the whistle of birds landing and taking off above the trail. Small plants droop over the path, soaking the calves of your pants with the morning dew. In some places, the path wanders through tall grass and coneflower plants, some of which come level with your waist, others with your shoulders. As you push onward, the trees grow farther apart, allowing more light to reach the forest floor before you step out into the sun. No trees to shadow you from its life-giving rays. The trail ahead winds through a meadow of vibrant grass and brush, harboring a rainbow of wildflowers: white and purple columbines, magenta sticky geraniums, indigo monkswood and mountain lupine, red Indian paintbrush, white cow parsnip, small yellow sunflowers. These are all original and natural colors. The yellows of the buses, reds of stop signs, purples of nail polishes are artificial, imposters of these real colors. A mountain harebell catches your eye. You crouch down to study the dangling light blue bell-like blossoms sprouting from the stem. A few feet away, you spot another mountain harebell, but its petals are a darker shade of indigo. Nearby is a third harebell, but with purple blossoms. You feel alive, lungs full of fresh air, nose filled with the scent of plants, eyes graced with the sight of nature, skin kissed with the warmth of the rising sun. Ahead, you spot a rock on which you come to rest and take a drink. Though you could sit here and admire this meadow for every moment of the day, you still have a long way to go before reaching your destination. You hoist yourself back onto your feet and continue on. Soon you come to a grove of aspens, absent of conifers. It is here that you are reminded that everything around you is one. All the aspens with black splits in their white trunks are part of a system of roots expanding from only a few parent trees. It's not just the trees that are a piece of the unity you feel. You sense the plants whispering with each other, their soft voices dancing through the leaves and grass with the summer breeze. Even the very earth in which their roots extend is part of this sacred conversation that hold all that surrounds you together, unlike any community from the place you left. You emerge from the tree line and see your destination in the distance. Before you can get there, you begin to taking on the multiple switchbacks that keep you from beelining on the steep incline to the top of the ridge. A couple of small green stay on the trail signs appear along the side of the trail, urging unwelcome feet to avoid eroding the plants and earth. At the top of the switchbacks, you pause to drink, catch your breath, and stare down the distance between you and your goal. It is hard to say how many hours and steps it has taken to get this far, but it does not seem to matter. The final stretch, the hardest part of your expedition, starts at the edge of an expansive rock bed of pebbles, boulders, and all sizes of rocks in between. Small stacks of rock slabs guide travelers from one side to the other. This is where the climb gradually steepens. Your legs ache, but each step brings you closer to the beauty which hides behind the rock table. Out of breath and sweating, you are careful and deliberate with each step you take so as not to slip on the hundreds of pebbles along the steepest portion of the trail. Despite your efforts, you cannot stop your feet from taking a slide now and then. As you climb closer and closer to the top, you grip the crags of the table to hoist yourself up the last few feet. The freshest of air fills your straining lungs when you finally plant your feet firmly on the top of the oval table mountain, with grass and small flowers growing between cracks of the rock, supporting your tired but sturdy stance. Now, 4,860 feet above where you started, you turn back around to see the foothills shrouded by pines and aspens, sloping down into a patchwork quilt of pastures and potato, wheat, and hay fields, stifled with houses of forest groves, all sewn together with dirt and asphalt roads. From up here, you are part of something more than you were down there. You turn around to gaze upon the majesty of the mountain, still spotted with wintry white, stretching from left to right as far as the eye can see. And before you are the highest peaks of this range of monumental mountains, the grandest of which surmounts another 2,715 feet into the sky above you. They are painted with shades of gray and subtle blues and textured with shadows. Euphoria envelops your soul as you stand before the subliminal magnificence. You are insignificant and a blessed fleck of life who cannot comprehend the millions of years long past which form this edifice of granite and earth before you. Here on this summit, you can not only hear the voices of nature, but you can understand them. The divinity of nature encircles you, permeating your senses, gathering you up in gentle, welcoming arms and whispering, "You are home." Thank you.
And that concludes our 2021 Creative Nonfiction reading. Thank you so much, everyone out there who tuned in. Let's give our class another round of applause. I'm so proud of them. Thank you, and good night.